The piercing glow of the alarm clock read 3:17 a.m., casting faint red light onto the sweat-drenched face of Lucas Halstead. His throat burned with raw intensity, and his chest heaved as though he had just sprinted a marathon. Groaning, he sat up, swallowing painfully and staring into the darkness of his room. "This is the 4th night in a row," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He fumbled for the water bottle on his nightstand, the cool liquid barely soothing his irritation. The thought gnawed at him all day. Why did he wake up like this? No dreams, no nightmares, just a void where memories of the night should have been. By the time the sun set again, his unease grew into determination. Maybe it's sleep apnea or something, his friend Rachel said over coffee. She stirred her latte, not meeting his eyes. "Apnea doesn't explain screaming," Lucas replied, his voice sharp despite the rasp. "I set my phone to record audio. It's like I'm howling, like something's chasing me." Rachel hesitated, her spoon clinking softly. "Okay, that's weird. What does your doctor say?" "I haven't gone." "Lucas, I don't think this is medical," he interrupted. "There's something else going on." That night, Lucas set up his DSLR on a tripod, adjusting its position to cover the entirety of his bed. He connected it to his laptop, ensuring it would record until morning. The red indicator light blinked like a watchful eye. As he lay down, anxiety prickled his skin. Every creak of the house made him flinch, but exhaustion soon overtook him. The next morning, Lucas stared at the footage, his heart pounding in his ears. At exactly 2:49 a.m., his body began to thrash under the covers. His mouth opened wide in a silent scream, his eyes shut tight. Then the camera began to glitch. A shadow moved across the frame, amorphous and slow. It hovered just beyond the bed's edge, too blurry to define. "What the hell?" Lucas whispered, leaning closer to the screen. When the shadow moved again, Lucas's scream echoed from the speakers. The figure darted toward the camera, and the footage cut out. Rachel shot out of her chair, heart hammering in her chest. "That's it. I'm done," she said, voice trembling. "We need to get out of here, now." Lucas grabbed her arm as she moved toward the door. "No, we can't just leave. Not yet. I need answers." His voice was desperate, but determination cut through the fear. She pulled away. "This isn't just something we can explain away, Lucas. You're talking about a figure that doesn't exist in the real world. This isn't normal. You've been screaming every night. We need help." Lucas paced in the living room, trying to steady his breathing. The footage from the hallway camera was still on the screen. The shadow's figure loomed at the edge of the frame, its presence almost mocking. But then something else caught his eye. There, in the far corner, a tiny movement, a flicker of light. He zoomed in. In the split second before the scream began, a faint shape, human or something close, dashed past the hallway light, too fast to see clearly. That wasn't there before," Lucas muttered, tapping the screen frantically. "There's something else." Rachel's eyes widened. "What do you mean, something else?" "It's not the shadow," Lucas said slowly, stepping back from the laptop. "There's something else hiding just out of view." A chill crept through the room as they both stood frozen, staring at the screen. Lucas's throat burned again, and the pain felt deeper, as though something were trying to claw its way out from within him. His hands shook, but his eyes stayed locked on the screen. The next night, Lucas set up the cameras again, determined to catch whatever was causing the disturbances. This time, he left the door open slightly, allowing the faintest sliver of moonlight to pierce through the darkness. The hours dragged on, the room thick with tension, but by 2:45 a.m., the inevitable happened. His breath hitched as he saw the figure again, a distorted shape creeping just outside the frame of the camera. But this time, something was different. As the figure stepped forward, Lucas's scream erupted from his own throat, echoing through the house, desperate and terrified. But this time, he wasn't alone in the scream. Another voice, lower and rasping, joined his own, a voice that sounded like his. Rachel stumbled into the room, her face pale. "Lucas, what's happening?" Before Lucas could answer, the footage cut abruptly, then played forward again. The figure, now in full view, stood inches from the camera. But it wasn't a shadow anymore. It was an exact replica of Lucas, staring back with an expression that made his blood run cold, empty, hollow, like a reflection of something long gone. Lucas staggered back from the screen, his heart thudding in his chest as he gasped for air. This isn't me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Rachel's face was ashen as she stared at the figure on the screen. "But it looks like you," she said, stepping closer. "It's you, but it's not." Lucas turned away, his hands gripping his hair in frustration. I don't understand. How can it look like me and not be me?" He paced back and forth, unable to keep still. Rachel's eyes never left the screen. "It's like it's mimicking you, everything you do, everything you say." Lucas's mind raced, trying to connect the dots, but the answers slipped through his fingers like sand. He couldn't stop thinking about the voice. The second voice. It was his voice, but wrong. Twisted and deeper, almost as if it had been corrupted. "Do you think it's—" Rachel started, but stopped, her face contorting in a mix of fear and disbelief. Could it be alive? Lucas didn't answer. His thoughts were too scattered. Alive? Could something like that even be alive? What did it want? And why did it scream when he screamed? He glanced back at the footage. The doppelgänger, his double, was still standing there, staring. The face was expressionless, but Lucas could feel the weight of its gaze, unnerving, like it was watching him, watching it. Minutes passed in eerie silence as Lucas and Rachel stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The calm of the moment seemed to stretch out infinitely, as though the very air had thickened with dread. Lucas finally broke the silence, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I have to confront it." Rachel shook her head. "What do you mean, confront it? We don't even know what it is. We can't just—" But Lucas wasn't listening. He was already standing up, walking toward the door. "It knows where I am. It knows everything about me. I need to know why it's here." He opened the door and stepped into the hallway, his breath shallow. The air in the house felt cold, as though the temperature had dropped several degrees since the last time he had been in this room. Rachel followed reluctantly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. "Lucas, this is insane. We don't even know what we're dealing with. We could be making it worse." But Lucas's mind was made up. "We're not getting anywhere sitting around. It has to show itself again, and when it does, I'm going to face it." Back in the living room, the cameras were set up once more, all angles covered. Lucas felt the weight of the decision pressing on him, but he couldn't stop now. The doppelganger had been toying with him for days, and he needed answers. Rachel, now sitting on the couch, wrapped herself in a blanket. "If anything happens, I'm calling the police," she muttered under her breath. The hours stretched on. Lucas's eyes felt heavy with exhaustion, but he couldn't risk falling asleep, not when the thing was out there. The air was thick with tension as he stared into the shadows, waiting for something to move. Anything. At exactly 3:11 a.m., the same low creaking sound echoed through the hallway. The door to the bedroom opened slowly, and Lucas's breath caught in his throat. There it was again, the shadow, shifting just out of reach of the camera's lens. But this time, Lucas wasn't screaming. He held his breath and stood motionless, watching as the figure emerged from the darkness, the same cold eyes locked on his own. The figure moved closer, closer than ever before, and just before it could reach the camera, it stopped. Lucas's heartbeat pounded in his ears, but there was no scream this time, only silence. And then in the quiet, the figure stepped aside, revealing something far worse. Another figure, another version of Lucas, one that he recognized from the footage. But this one was not still. This one moved. It smiled,